Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for episode 4 of season 2 of Revise and Resubmit. I'm Dr. Kim Bissell, the Southern Progress Endowed Professor of Magazine Journalism and the Associate Dean for Research in the College of Communication and Information Sciences at the University of Alabama.
And I'm Dr. Annalisa Volin, an Assistant Professor in the Department of Communication Studies, also at the University of Alabama. And we both work in the Institute for Communication and Information Research, or the ICIR, at UA. So, Kim, I was thinking about all of the celebrities that I've met over the years, and there haven't been many. But I met Martin Sheen once, like shook his hand, looked at him, met. And Lou Diamond Phillips. And both of those were while I interned in DC as an undergrad, and they were testifying to Congress about something. But since then, none. And I mean, maybe I'm not exactly the starstruck type of person, and I'd be totally cool if there was ever a celebrity within 10 yards of me. But then I also remember back to the reason I met Lou Diamond Phillips, and that was because I was staring at him because I guess I was starstruck across the Capitol dining hall, and he came over and was like, hello. So my question to you is, have you met any celebrities, had conversations with them? What happened?
Yeah, so I don't have anything interesting or exciting to report in that front. I've met a few athletes in my days working professionally as a photographer. I've actually been taken out by a few professional athletes while working as a professional photographer on the sidelines of NFL games. But that's about the most I can say about my own celebrity encounters. However, today we are joined by someone who has had some pretty interesting encounters with celebrities while doing her work as a scholar, looking at the representation of race within the Hollywood film and television industry. She's the type of expert who is called on to serve as a panelist with some of the most famous film and television celebrities. And today, she tells us all about it. She studies not only the count or the number of times we see Black characters in television and film roles, but she looks at their representation in a mediated context through a critical lens. She's the author of the book, The Cultural Politics of Colorblind TV Casting, and has spent the bulk of her research time looking at not only who's on the camera, but who's also behind the camera.
Dr. Kristin Warner is an associate professor in the Department of Journalism and Creative Media and teaches students about the ethics of television and film production and colorblinding in the film industry. We are thrilled to have Kristin joining us today. Welcome, Kristin.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Kristin.
Thanks for having me.
So before we get started talking about your research and a little bit more about who you are and what you do, I remember seeing a mention about you a few years ago in a story about the representation of Black women in the media. And you were on this panel titled The Not So Silver Screen Black Women in the Media. And that panel examined the invisibility and devaluing of Black women in the media and the wage gap for Black women in the entertainment industry. And one of the things I remembered about that panel was that you were on that with some pretty big names in the entertainment industry. Not that you're not a big name. But can you tell us a little bit about that? That seemed like a really cool thing to do.
Yeah, so it was one of the events that was produced at the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles and was sort of the brainchild of the Hammer and Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a famous critical race theorist and who came up with the idea of intersectionality and like a huge, just a huge person in the field. And so I was invited to offer my insights into it. So it was me and Kimberly and Diane Carroll, which was
Wow.
Which is
insane.
huge.
it was insane. It was like, oh my God, I look over there and there's Diane Carroll. And she's just so gorgeous. She was so gorgeous, and she was just so, charitable and kind. And, and even though, like she's passed now, but one of my favorite moments was her dozing off in the middle of the panel. And I was like, you know what? Like, I don't blame you, Diane Carroll. I would too. Like, you deserve a nap. Take your rest.
Okay, so Kristin, I have a follow-up for you.
Sure.
When you got the invitation to be on that panel, was it a phone call? Was it an email? And what was your first reaction?
So it was a friend of mine who was a colleague, was sort of part of the team assembling folks. And so she sent me a Facebook message, actually, and was like, hey, do you want to be on this little panel? And I said, yeah, I mean, sure, I'm available. And then as the names started to come, and she was like, and Diane Carroll will be here. I was like, stop. Stop. Like, it was just very, like, this is real. Like, this is, oh, y'all for real. Like, I need to bring my A game. And like, between Diane Carroll and like Kimberly Crenshaw, like, who again is this huge name, Kimberly Crenshaw, was like, yeah, I read your book. And I was like, oh my God.
Wow.
Just knock me down. I'm ready to go. Like, it was one of those that was very affirming and terrifying in equal parts. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Can you tell our listeners a little bit about where you're from and who you are?
So I am originally from South Louisiana. My family still is there. I went to LSU for undergrad, and I was a journalism major with a film minor. And the film minor I was much more interested in than the major. Interestingly, I learned a lot. Like, there were a lot of tools that I still take with me. Like, I learned how to research and dig and interview and all those things, but I was much more the filmy. And so I went to grad school, my master's at the University of Arizona in film, and then did my PhD at the University of Texas in Austin in radio, TV, film. So I just sort of made my way through the Southwest. Yeah.
Nice. So can you give us an elevator pitch of your research and scholarship?
Sure. So I am interested in race and representation, but more specifically, I'm interested in the ways that representation occurs. So it's not just, to me, interesting to look at the final results, like what airs, and to be able to study the characteristics of characters. But more, I'm interested in how those characters come to be. I'm interested in the writing process. I'm interested in more specifically in the casting process. What decisions are made at all levels to determine, what you end up seeing as final product. And so that takes me in a variety of different avenues. On one hand, I'm interested in sort of like watching and observing casting processes and taking into account the sort of histories of innovations like colorblind casting as methods of trying to increase diversity on screen and in theaters and in those kinds of avenues. But on the other hand, I'm also interested in the labor. I'm actually interested in the means of employment and how employment at the levels of at each level of industry, from the casting directors to the producers and writers rooms and showrunners and executive C-suites, how all at every level those the inclusion or lack thereof ends up shaping the representations that you see for years to come. So it's a mixture of those things.
I think that's that's really cool, because I think that there's so many of us who we watch films and we watch TV and we think, well, that's on the screen and that's who we get. Yep. And I guess that was how it was supposed to be, without even even thinking about or having any inkling of understanding of all of the decisions that come before that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think in film and media studies, but I think also across, the spectrum of folks who study representation and communications and in other areas, I think we largely, have focused on positive and negative representation. We focus largely on what's good and what's bad, and we have very poor evaluative tools to measure that. Like we just can't. It's so reductive in terms of how we analyze or evaluate or assess what's positive or what's negative. We don't really even understand or are able to really define what positive means really, or negative in that same way. So it felt like to keep banging that drum, to keep hitting your head against that wall it felt pointless. And so I wanted to see what's in between that. Like, is there a spectrum of so-called positive and so-called negative? And is there something in between that you can analyze and understand how all these things work? And so thinking through the actual process of production, thinking through the actual process of casting, thinking through the decision trees that are made in terms of who gets to be where and be placed in what, and what is it that you expect from these, bodies of color or these different looking bodies. All of that seemed to be much more substantive. There seemed to be much more I could do with that,
So, I mean, all of this is just so fascinating. So I cannot wait to hear your answer for this. If you had to come up with a headline for one of your more interesting findings, what would it be?
I mean, it would be, let's see. The one that usually sort of stuns my students is, money isn't going to determine diversity. Money isn't going to change diversity. It doesn't matter how much you try to argue that diversity in terms of like multicultural, multicultural casting and all those things. It doesn't, like, you can make the point to executives all day about how successful these things are. Like Fast and Furious movies make billions of dollars, and movies that have predominantly Black casts do significantly well. You can make that argument, or in the same way that you can make the argument about movies that are about women and made and targeted to women are super successful. You won't ever change the needle, because at the end of the day, it's not money that moves the needle. It's personal taste, ironically. It is personal values and attitudes. And so if you have a business that is largely run by white men, and who like their tastes to be validated, then any number of dollars that you can throw in their faces and say, this will change, doesn't move them. What they are moved by are the things that they enjoy. And that is a hard thing to sort of get your arms around, because we have been taught that it's business, right? And business is the motivator, but that's not exactly true. When you have a working system in your mind that, it may take me longer to make money the way that I want to make money, but I can do it the way I'm accustomed to. I can do it the way that it's been done. And you can say that this way is shorter, and there's a shortcut to wealth untold. But I just as easy stick to my guns and do it the way that I want to do it. And that is, I think, sort of one of the most, the thing that actually, is most sort of daunting to sort of process, is that as much as we want to believe that, you can put numbers and put data in the faces of some of these folks and say, this is what you can do, they don't take the bait.
Wow. So, one thing that you mentioned several minutes ago, but I'm hearing some of that in your last answer, is the framework of being a critical scholar, and so I think when I first heard that, I was like, well, aren't we all critical scholars? I mean, we all critically think, right? But
Yeah.
can you tell our listeners a little bit more about what it means to be a critical scholar?
Sure. So in my mind, the critical part is the thing that my mind first always goes to are questions of power.
Mm-hmm.
Questions of where is power located. And so power can be located in a variety of different places. Power isn't just top down, but it can be up, it can be, come up from the ground, it can be across groups, it can operate in a variety of different ways. And so I'm interested in where and how power emerges, and that is usually sort of the starting point. So if and how power sort of obscures itself, because like power doesn't want to be lost. Like people who wield power don't want to lose it. So it seems always most interesting to sort of figure out how it disguises itself or how it is obscured. And so for me, critical is sort of thinking about those kinds of inequalities, thinking about the systems and structures that hold power and then withhold it from others. That is usually my defining position. Yeah.
And as you mentioned, I mean, so power can look like values.
Yes.
Not just
Money.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Kristin, you had mentioned earlier, you had referenced a book. And so what I'm wondering is, as you were working on that, I mean, it obviously had to be a fairly involved project. How did you manage the project over time? How did you stay positive? And certainly dealing with the topic that you're dealing with, I would imagine it might even get depressing is probably the wrong word, but just like, bumping up against what everything that you've found in your previous research about, if you've got white men that are in control, their values and what they want to see is what they're going to produce, and money doesn't matter. So can you talk a little bit about kind of the book project and how you manage that?
Sure. So some of the work in the book project stemmed from my dissertation research. And I was fortunate, one of the things about doing ethnographic research as a graduate student is that, people take pity on you, and they're much more inclined to see you if they just like, I'm just a lowly graduate student and I just need this, because you have to understand I need to graduate.
Yep.
And so, I was able to, this is in the days before LinkedIn, and, this is when you had to cold call so many people to try and find one person and to sort of help you navigate this. And so I somehow lucked into one person who snowballed me into like 5 or 6 meetings. And so I went to LA one summer and spent a week or two talking and interviewing these people and watching them do their jobs and really trying to take in the space and take in how all these things work. And my project before that was like, colorblind casting is treacherous. It's the seemingly, positive thing, but it actually has all these pitfalls attached to it, and that in the end. But by the time I finished with that project, by the time I finished with my field research, I came out with like this whole other area that I didn't plan for, which was, yeah, all that is true, and employment is equally important to these people. So so they are less interested in, are you playing a substantial dimensional, character, and versus are you playing something that you can take some pride in, because you're not playing in your mind something negative like a drug dealer or a slave or a butler or a maid. Or you get to play a judge with no background or anything, but you get paid to do something good. You get to pay your bills. And I got to talk to all these people who were like, we are interested in numbers. If we're a union, we want our membership body to be working. We don't care what they do, and we can't judge, nor do we control content. So it turned a lot of what I was thinking. It made it much more complicated, and made me have to sort of grapple with a lot more about what all this means. And so that can take you down some dark roads of sort of nihilism, for sure. because the more that you dig through, and I do a lot of discursive work, and so I'm reading all of these interviews, transcripts, and I'm reading all these news stories, and I'm looking at all these trade articles, and as I sort of like pull and sift through to sort of see what the things that they all have in common, it's a lot of spin. It's a lot of, we want bodies, but we're not asking for difference. And then I look at, what audiences want, and audiences have certainly been socialized into looking for bodies and not asking for more. And so it became this whole sort of this tornado of like, how do you make something that is, that is diagnosing this phenomenon that has all these moving parts to it, and still at the same time maybe offer a glimmer of hope. And I honestly, to this day, don't know if I accomplished the hope, because I don't necessarily know if I have it. But I think, but I see, and so when I wrote the book, I think it was much more about trying to just trying to get this process understood, trying to sort of explain the complexities. And I will say, the book came out in 2015. It took 5 years, but I have been of late, evidently, the Casting Society of America picked this book as their book club book.
Wow.
Whoa.
Oh my goodness.
So I got this sort of random set of emails from casting directors who were like, we read your book. We have all these questions.
Wow.
You understand kind of what it is that we're doing, and you make it make sense. So if for no other reason than that, like, my struggle seems to be worth it. Like,
yes.
It's like, okay, I'm pointing out this thing from 5 years ago, the work that I've been doing since 2009, and it still seems relevant, and they see sort of the processes at hand and recognize that, they are but one part of this, why this is so difficult to do right. And it was good. Like, that was like a good sort of like, well, I might not have like a whole lot of hope, but that's a good start,
Yeah, for sure.
That's
Well,
very
for all
cool.
of our listeners, we will definitely include information about Kristin's book and where you can find it in the description for this episode. So don't worry, we will let you know how you can buy it and read it, and then you can have your own book club about it.
Yes.
So you've talked a little bit about just kind of the complexities of decisions and processes, and are you an expert in every single one of them? Who do you lean on to provide insight in some of the places where you are maybe not the quote unquote expert as far as your training and research goes?
So I think, my little field that mostly is sort of grappling with media industries and race representation, critical race theory, and media studies. Like, we're a small, like that, like the overlapping circles on that are produce a very small pool of scholars, and so we all know each other. And so if there are areas, for example, I'm not, my specialization is not history. I am very much a contemporary scholar. Like, I can dig if I need to, but I'm not an archivist. Like, I don't do a lot of archival research. And so when I have questions, or or when the research needs to tend to trend towards something historically, like, I will ask, my friends, my colleagues who do that work, like, help me, show me where to start. I have, one of the things that I didn't know when I first started all of this was, like, there's not a whole lot of work in colorblind casting as it relates to film and television. There's lots of work on acting. There's lots of work on, method and all of that stuff, but they're in typing, but there's not a whole lot of work on colorblind casting. One of my dear friends and colleagues in performance studies was like, you should look at performance like this in theater and find it. And so it just opened up a whole world of scholarship that I had no idea about. Around it. So, you talk to people long enough and they'll start to give you little ideas and things that help you think about it. I recently wrote an article that I am most proud about Magic Mike XXL. And affect. And one of the things I was trying to sort of argue was that the movie, and the way the movie works is that that representation is in its most meaningful form is both auditory and visual. So it's not just about you seeing yourself, but it's about you hearing something in the text that makes you feel called. And so it's this true audio visual hailing. And so I needed to sort of dig into sound studies because that's part of how it works. And Lord, I had no idea about sound studies. It was a world unknown to me. And so I talked to a lot of sound studies people, and including one of our colleagues, Alex Veazey, to help me, like, point me into the directions where the things I need to read to understand vibration and understand all these things. So everything requires helping hands.
Yeah.
So, Kristin, as you were working on the book, and you had mentioned that it was a several years in the making sort of process, can you explain to our listeners just a little bit about the review process? I mean, do you do the whole thing and then submit it out for feedback? Are you getting feedback through chunks of it? Can you kind of shed some light on that for our listeners?
Sure. So with the first book, it was I sent out an article that I kind of cut from the dissertation and sent it to a journal, and it got accepted. So I had a good sense that if I were to sort of to expand on that, revise it, and that there was something to it that I could I could actually make this a book, and take out all the excess and re-add things and innovate it in a different way. And so I submitted it to press with a book chat. I had my proposal consisted of the actual proposal itself and then 2 chapters. One, and that was the initial review process. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And how do you is the resilience or the persisting you dig into and find as you're doing those long projects?
Oh, good God. Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, I remember I was in Louisiana for the summer, and it was 2014, and I was at home spending the summer writing. And I was just, it was just this every day. I went to this coffee shop in my hometown. I'm from a very small town. And they had this coffee shop that had 2 people in it. And I would sit there every day from like 8 to 6, churning out pages and, drinking not great coffee and churning out just pages and revising and having to sort of do research, like find out new things as you go. So having sort of like, this chapter needs to look like this. Let me sketch out kind of roughly what I want it to be. Now I need to read about this. I don't know anything about this, this network that I need to sort of understand in order to make this chapter work. And, I need to sort of explain this area. And so it would just be this brutal thing. So essentially I wrote the book, the revisions, added chapters, all of that. I wrote it in essentially 4 months. So I do not recommend that as a life choice. I don't recommend it. Do it over time, process it, do a little a day. Don't write it all in once because you don't sleep. But I think, it was one of those where it was like it was an experience of really just sort of pushing through and giving yourself, you know, like there were days when I didn't write anything, and there were days where I just was like, I can revise today. Like, this is all I have the energy for, is to just let me look back through what I wrote and let me make sure that it makes sense, because I could have been, you know, daydreaming and wrote some nonsense. So like, let me figure that out. And then there are days when you just have like the muse is on your shoulder and she's just like, let's go, and you can write, you know, you can finish half a chapter. So it really was just a pace, and then an ability to, when you're done, you must let go. Like, you must let go. Like, do not sit there and well, maybe something will come. No, you're done. Like, you really are done. Turn in the chapter, you know, like, go ahead, you're finished. Like, it'll be what it'll be, and trust that the process will do what it needs to do.
Wow. So shifting gears just a little bit, we always like to end on kind of a fun question. As academics, we do have the good fortune of being able to travel to different countries or different cities around the U.S. to present our research at conferences. Do you have a favorite place that you've visited when you've traveled to present research, or a place that you're looking forward to visiting?
So two places. I went to it seems like it was like a divine treat. Last November, I went to Hawaii for American Studies.
Oh, cool.
And it was such a nice time.
Yes.
It was so wonderful, and had I known it would be the last time I would travel really anywhere, I would have spent more time at the beach. but I thought, well, you know, we'll get this time again. So that one, and also for American Studies. American Studies likes to take us to a lot of fun places. I went to San Juan, Puerto Rico.
Wow.
That was also fun. Looking forward to, at some point, there was a media industries conference in London that I was really looking forward to attending. And maybe, you know, at some point in the future, we can go back.
For sure. Well, Kristin, it's been so fun talking with you today and getting this chance to learn more about you and the research that you do. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been really fun.
I'm so glad y'all invited me. Thank you.
Thanks, Kristin.
Of course.